So what we're going to discuss today is cybersecurity training and the vulnerabilities working outside the company network and everybody's role in addressing that. So why we're here today. My mission when I started as an MSP was to assist small and medium businesses so that they can take care of their IT needs and stay as competitive as possible and keep doing the jobs that they need to be doing. My experience over the years doing this, ransomware is very, very nasty. One other thing that I really want to get out there is to let everybody know there are a lot of things that every person can do to avoid any type of vulnerability. At the end of this, I will probably send out a survey that has 2 to 3 questions on it. Will only take a couple of minutes. And that's a part of my mission to make sure that I get some feedback from everybody. I'd love to know what the most important thing or valuable thing that you learned today. Was there anything that we didn't cover or go deep enough on? And then is there anybody else that needs to have this type of training? So the mission has been to bring security focus to owners and staff of all small businesses. And we highlight who can avoid getting breached. A lot of this is human nature, and that's what we want to discuss today. So the agenda that we're going to cover: the evolution of cybercrime, why this is happening, who are prime targets, how are the bad guys doing this, your role, what you can do to protect yourself, your family, and your employer, and then resources. Where can you go to learn more? So why is this happening? The basics is it's effective for criminals to make money. The change in crime initiated with online payment systems has been dramatic over the last few years. Bad guys, quite frankly, have no worries about being caught. Cyber or cryptocurrency and things like that make it very easy for them to not have the payment systems tracked. And it's some irony to me that the entire dark web was developed really as a part of the US government during wartime many years ago. And bad guys have used it as an invisible freeway that most of us will never experience. The movie Silk Road does a good job of telling kind of the true story of how the dark net exploded and the crime that happens with it. There is a lot of, I think, kind of myths around the dark web, so we'll hit on that here shortly. And also to announce, there's an entire ecosystem, including job recruitment out there. So what most of us see is that top 4% of the web, you know, Yahoo, Google, Bing, websites, and so forth. There's actually different layers. You know, we see the deep web, dark web, and about 90% of all content on the web is estimated to be in the dark. So what is out there? Stolen credentials used to test and open backdoor access into corporate networks. And this is a scary statistic from my point of view. I learned this one within the last month as I've continued to do cyber security training. They say on average 197 days. That's the average length of time it takes for organizations to identify a data breach. That means that the breach has been out there on the network for 197 days. That's a scary amount of time. So when these ransomwares hit, that's why a lot of times the IT department or IT consultants say your best case scenario is reinstalling everything. You don't know what other backdoors have been put out there. Now, that's an extended length of time. That's not to say that it can't happen very quickly. Here's a article where in 19 minutes, Russian hackers attacked and gained access into networks. 19 minutes, very scary to me. That's a quick amount of time to get into any network. Cybercrime online shopping. It sounds weird, but it's almost like there's a Amazon online. If you look at these snippets here, this is an actual snapshot of a Russian dark website that sold bank account and credit card information. It's very similar to a regular shopping cart. The more items that you add, the higher the dollars go in the cart. If you look at the right side of the image, you'll see where European kroners added up for checkout as you add the CVV number and address associated with credit cards. The right is a pretty recent image of a dark net site. You can see the sophistication that they've grown and the categories they have: forgeries, drugs, weapons, etc. Very sadly in this world, this is out there. Most of us can't have our head in the sand anymore and realize this. I want to make note too that this cybercrime is very competitive. And what this snapshot is right here is an actual job ad to attract hackers. Notice that they have a try before you buy, competitive salary, breakout of payment shares, etc. The underground version of Indeed or Monster, for example. And it's impactful to see that the organizational structure is very similar to US corporations. This is big business. As a few years ago, and I believe this was about 7 years ago, the Secret Service announced that the revenues gained from financial crimes, identity theft, cyber crimes surpassed that of drug trafficking as of like 7 or 8 years ago. And that's quite extraordinary. So this is why they do it. There's a very lucrative payoff. If you see on the right, that's the pay scale of items and what they're worth. You know, a top one right there for $200, a remote access Trojan virus. For $50, password stealers. And people underestimate the sophistication of this. A lot of times people believe that what they're doing is some hacker in overseas in a basement that's tattooed and long hair and all this other stuff, when it could be your stay-at-home mom next door went on the dark web and bought a Raspberry Pi device that came preloaded with a lot of these tools. All they have to do is basically input the data of the person that they're trying to hack, and like many applications, you hit run and it just goes. So what does organized crime look like? This is very interesting to me because this is an actual slide from an RSA presentation representing organized crime structure. If you notice how similar it looks to a modern organizational chart, you've got a technical manager who's basically like a CIO, money operations manager who's like a CFO, and you'll see how similar this is to a normal business structure. And when we talk about organized crime syndicates, they are organized. So who are the targets? This one, I have a lot of conversations with all the time. Most people assume it's larger businesses. So do we think that it happens to anybody? Most? Small, medium businesses? Big businesses? We hear about the news, so we hear about the big ticket items that are breaches. So for instance, on here, Target. Everybody probably heard about Target being hacked many years or a couple of years ago. And what they didn't hear in the news is what happened was the hackers targeted their HVAC vendor, who had an Excel spreadsheet containing the Wi-Fi passwords for local Target locations. They sold that information to local hackers, who then successfully conducted an email phishing attack on the vendor and found the spreadsheet passwords. They went and sat in the parking lot of Target logged onto the Wi-Fi and found that the network wasn't segmented. They had full access to servers, point of sale machines, everything. It's only the large breaches that make the news, but what doesn't make the news are the smaller ones. And not to put a little fear in everybody, but this happens here locally more than everybody wants to know, because if you're a small and medium business, you're not going to go to the news media. You're not going to try to tell everybody that you had this, but there are requirements in certain industries to announce when you have breaches. So why are smaller businesses prime targets? Quite frankly, one of the biggest reasons is budget. Enterprise businesses can afford to buy a $40,000 firewall, and they can have a CISO on staff. If you look at the skill level too, a lot of small businesses think that they can hire an IT guy who does help desk, deployments, budgeting, security measures. And while there are people out there who have the skill set to do all of those, it's not normal to think that one person can do all of that in a standard week. Aging equipment and patches. Most of them don't do refreshes and don't have the ability to make sure everything's currently updated, whether that's machine updates, antivirus updates, all of those types of things. A lot of times business owners wear multiple hats and they don't have the ability to focus on security. And this one's sad. A lot of small businesses just don't believe it'll happen to them, because why would somebody target them? But 58%, if you'll notice what's circled down here below, victims are categorized as small businesses. These hackers and groups realized a long time ago that the smaller businesses didn't have the sophistication of enterprise level businesses. They couldn't afford the $40,000 firewall, for example. I want to highlight this one because I've seen this a couple of times. Small and medium businesses believe their data is not valuable. And I think that's a perception that a lot of people shouldn't buy into. We have the ability to run different reports on our clients, and one of the reports that we do is a breach summary of what potential dollar amount value there is on a network. We had a client that is between 12 and 15 employees, so they are small, and we ran this report for them. And my jaw dropped when the dollar amount value was $368,000 for a 12 to 15 person company. When we opened up the report, what it showed us was employee social security numbers, potential credit card numbers, bank account numbers. So it looks for those things on the network. First thing the client says to us is, why didn't we stop that? We don't monitor every employee what they do during their workday. And majority of those breach came from their office manager submitting payroll. They were submitting payroll via an Excel spreadsheet with all the information, emailing it to their payroll vendor. A simple way to stop this, I mean, there's more sophisticated ways, but was to password protect the Excel spreadsheet, and then also make sure that it is sent via encryption and email. That would eliminate a lot of that risk right there. But as an employer, I believe it's my duty to make sure that I'm taking care of my employees' information as well. So I don't want to have to necessarily say that they've been vulnerable because we have their HR information in our systems. So it's not always the client data that's important. You got to look at it as you're protecting your employees' data too. So on this too, most small and medium businesses, one, either don't know how to educate their employees, or don't have the budget to educate their employees, or have never even thought about it, quite frankly. And if you look at the malicious email information on the left, that shows you per organization, size by year, what the average amount of emails that are targeting. So if you look at under 250 employees, they're getting 6 emails. 2,500 plus employees is only getting 11. So it's just as common. That scale doesn't grow drastically. The ratio of those malicious emails per day is just drastic to me. Another statistic that maybe haven't heard on the news or anything else, but since the pandemic, COVID-19 started in middle of February, there has been a 4,000% increase in COVID-19 related phishing emails. And I'll say that again, 4,000% increase. That is drastic, and it's working. I tell people all the time, never click on one of those COVID maps or anything else like that. If you're curious, always go straight to the source. Go to their websites. Don't click any links. So how do the bad guys get in? Whether you're big or small, it's happening, and phishing is one of the easiest ways that these bad actors have the ability to go through it. So you may inadvertently open an email attachment that has a hidden payload. I use this example in the training that I've gone through. We all almost have one of these devices with us at all times. And one of the scariest ones that happened to me was an email that came across. So when you're looking at your email, it has an embedded picture that looks like a hair on your phone. So you're going to move the hair off your phone and you're actually clicking on an embedded hyperlink in that file. I mean, how ingenious is this? It's funny, I was talking with another cybersecurity expert and he goes, I never try to clean anything off my phone unless it's, locked, and, I'll blow it off, and just, there's a lot of little things just to be very careful about. Visiting an infected website via a link from an email or just normal web browsing. I think it was about 6-7 years ago, CNN's website was hacked and had malicious downloads on it. So that happens. The agent sits dormant on a PC or Mac, undetected by these scanning tools. These are called zero-day infections. And one of the things that's another scary statistic, in 2019, they estimated that business fall victim to a ransomware attack every 14 seconds. I mean, that is just drastic to me. So, what is social engineering and pretexting? Social engineering has become very mainstream. I talk about how I don't like to share a lot out on social media, any of my personal references and so forth. This is a snapshot of my Facebook. You will see I kind of blocked out my high school, but it is on there. Why is that? Because a lot of times your mascot, high school mascot, or where you went is one of those safe questions on the bank sites. I was talking with a peer in my industry, and they said they hired a private investigator a few years ago to find an uncle of theirs. And what they received from them in just a couple of hours was more personal information than they could believe. It was last known addresses. It was all of his employment records, his children's last known addresses and employment records, financial institutions, credit reports with partial account numbers. And you've got to think, if this is available to a private investigator, you can bet your money on it that the hackers are getting this information too. So all they need to do is feed that information along with a few family and friends' names, birthdays, which most of the time can be pulled from social media, and they just plug it into a password cracking application. So they put some of that information in there and hit start, and that application just runs. So the less personal information you post about yourself, your friends, your family, the safer you are. These don't always involve people hacking or anything else. They're just reviewing your personal information. A couple of years ago, I'll share a story that I did to one of my best friends. They went on vacation. I was house setting for them. And Day 2 of their vacation, they posted, hey, we're having a great time in Turks and Caicos. Here's the beach, toes in the sand, all of that, blah, blah, blah. And I've had conversations with them and warned them not to do this. So when they came home, they were really shocked when their TV was gone. And I let them be a little fearful for a minute. Now, I was the one that took their TV off the entertainment center, but it got the point across to them. I said, you broadcasted that to everybody in the world that knew you weren't home. Thankfully, it was just me, and I pulled their TV out of the garage and put it right back. So that kind of hit home to them. And another statistic, but global losses to business email compromise exceeded $12 billion. Social engineering, phone calls. My mother is 81 years old, retired school teacher, and I am her help desk still. So I've gotten the calls that she's received a phone call from Microsoft. I'm like, Mom, no, Microsoft's never going to call you. But this is an example of an actual preschool where their Facebook page was infected, and a Facebook technician offered to remote in and help fix it. Now, the end user let them in, and they had to actually have their servers rolled back to the previous day. They had only been on her computer for less than 20 minutes when she called asking for firewall passwords. But this is happening not just from Microsoft. There are other scams. We get the robo-dialers all the time. I use the example of if you receive a voicemail from a credit card company, don't call the number back that they left in the voicemail. Pull your credit card out and call that number direct. That's a second form of authentication. We call it two-factor authentication a lot of times. But that is your best defense against these type of, that's why we say social engineering. Basically, they're tricking you into doing something. We've all probably heard about the wire transfer frauds and so forth. Sadly, about 4 years ago, we had a client that the CEO was traveling in Atlanta, had her iPad stolen. Well, about 3 weeks later, their accounts payable person received an email from the CEO saying, please wire $5,000 to this account. Accounts payable person didn't think anything of it, did it. Kept going until it exceeded over $100,000. And quite frankly, the bad part about this was that the accounts payable person who had been with the company for almost 30 years was like a sister to the CEO. And the CEO said her having to deal with this situation was one of the hardest things she ever did, because it was actually negligence on the employee to execute all the wire transfers without a second verification method. And at that time, social engineering riders on insurance weren't added, so it was completely the fault and negligence of the employee. We've seen where employees have been sued for doing this in the past by the employers because it wasn't the employer's fault. Their training said not to do anything without proper verification. So mobile devices, people think that these were safe, and I've said it for years, they're not. They're fair game. I don't trust Google Store, App Store, and even for a matter, Apple Store. Apple does a better job of verifying this, but when you hear things like App Store security threat forces Google Play to remove 145 apps, and then 39% of apps discovered are malicious back in 2015, these are scary numbers. Somebody put them on there and it got broadcast out to everybody. So best thing to think about there is if you have an app on your phone and you don't use it, delete it. If you don't know for a fact that, the app you're getting ready to download is for your bank, don't install it. Be very careful. Google Play, again, just last year, 25 malicious apps with 2.1 million downloads had random ads to generate revenue. And then Apple removed 300 infected apps from the App Store. And I'll say this too, Macs are definitely fair game. For years and years and years, people are saying, my Mac is not at risk, I don't need antivirus, and it always just made me cringe and be scared. Yes, I will say this, majority of viruses were written for Windows because majority of devices in the corporate world were Microsoft Windows. The same can be said now. Majority of people are carrying an iPhone or a Droid phone. So most of the viruses that are for mobile devices are written for those two platforms. Mac has become more predominant. So there are viruses and malicious attacks that are happening on all sides of the spectrum. It's interesting, this slide was taken from, again, RSA conference back in 2018. And I consider them to be one of the premier educational security conferences where they dedicated a few sessions back on, I think 2016, just to Macs and their security. So these are sample types of ransomware and malicious threats that are specifically targeting Macs. They are gonna come out more and more and more. Why is crypto mining exploding and what is it? Sorry if I skipped there. Crypto mining is basically where a hacker implants a piece of software to run on your computer in the background, and it uses that computer's resource to calculate and secure the digital security without you even knowing it. It'll cause your computer to slow down or even your electricity bill to increase just enough that you might not notice it. When they are done using the computer for mining, they repurpose it or could repurpose it to as a connecting point for another PC or another type of malicious activity. Malware-based crypto mining attacks happen quite often, and people are not realizing that this is becoming more and more common daily. So if you're not a little scared right now, then I haven't done my job. And before I go into what you do, I want to actually say human nature here again. I want everybody to think about how they would answer this question. If I was going to attempt to hack your company's network, what do you think I would do? And I'll pause for a second on that, because I'm not going to sit here and try to hack through your firewall, get past your antivirus, get past all your policies, Active Directory, and all those types of things. That's a lot of work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drive over to your company and I'm going to throw 10 or 20 thumb drives in your parking lot. And you go, why? Well, it's human nature to see a thumb drive on the ground and go, oh, what if somebody's tax returns on there, their kids' baby photos, you know, their thesis paper or a work project that's very important. Maybe if I plug it into the computer, maybe I can find out who it belongs to and get it back in their hands. Well, what happens when they take that USB drive inside and plug it into the computer is it then calls home. The piece of software that I've put on that calls home and says, hey, they just opened the back door. This network is now available to you. How can IT departments stop that? Well, we could block USB ports from being used, but then you've got keyboard and mice that you have to use. Years ago, we were doing that, and then people would actually unplug their keyboard to plug one in. I was shocked by that. So what can you do to protect yourself, your family, and your employer? This is an official post on the FBI website where they dedicated a whole section to cybercrime. For each type of crime, the description of it, and what you can do to prevent it. The number one thing they list as a tip for dealing with ransomware is to educate your staff in their role of protecting the organization's data. That's the number one thing. It is not to have a robust or brand name firewall or certain antivirus. It's not to have your computer up to date and all of these other things that technically IT can do, but I can never stop the person behind the keyboard or mouse from clicking on something. I can't stop somebody, and I'll use this as an example. If my wife were to give a stranger our bank account information and the password, how was I going to stop her from doing that? Now, she knows better because she's had training, right? Over the years, that's not a good idea. So what can you do? And I can almost hear the groans over the air when people hear me say this. Passwords, strong passwords, rotate every 90 days. And here's some examples. So, another phrase, something that I do is instead of trying to remember all these passwords or, an alphanumeric combination, I have one extremely long password that is a phrase. And I always use the example, I like to walk on the beach. So it's a phrase I'll remember, and I know that the character is going to be, instead of the word two, it's a number two, instead of an A, it's an ampersand, so forth. So this is an interesting little image that I like to say. Think about security. Treat your passwords like your underpants. Change them often, don't leave them lying around, and definitely don't share them. And a lot of people reuse the same passwords. So remember earlier when I talked about a password cracking application? If they find one, they can put it in there and run any combination of this. Okay, you've changed from I like to walk on the beach number 1 exclamation point to I like to walk on the beach number 2 exclamation point. That'll be so easy for those applications to find very quickly. So I do recommend that you use a password manager. I personally use 2. I have one for my personal information and I have one for work information. A password manager allows you to create a lot of random passwords. It saves them in there and you only have to remember the master password. I could not tell you the password to my bank account, my credit card account. It's probably that long alphanumeric string that I couldn't remember if I tried. It'll automatically generate that. Most password managers have that. People hear about LastPass and other ones that are out there. There are now corporate password managers for teams and so forth to use. So how many of us use that same password across multiple platforms? I would be surprised if anybody on this call told me they had a different password for everything out there. Now keep in mind that your credentials matter to the security of what they're allowing you access to. I've said many years, I have 3 different email accounts, one for work, one for family and bills, and then one that's just for junk. Well, the junk one, if I sign up for something, yeah, I have a pretty standard password, but if anybody gets access to it, I don't care. There's not important information on it. If they got my work one or my personal one, I do care about that one. That one's specific, and they're not anywhere near the same passwords. So the information here is be aware that if a hacker gets one version of your password, can they get multiple versions of it and potentially gain access to your banking, credit card, or even healthcare sites? Remember the dark web earlier that we were talking about? These stolen credentials are picked up quickly, and the first thing they do is pepper all the common sites with that combination to see if they can get into something more valuable. So suggestions that we recommend that you can do. The most important thing that you've got to realize is that the data is key. That is the piece of information that is most valuable. So make sure that it's on a company server or a company managed cloud application. I used an example here. We have Dropbox and we also have file servers, right? So it's secured. There are authentications that happen on both of those systems. Now, we also make sure that we've got a whole new world with the fact that everybody's working from home. There are new challenges there. We have had some companies that have been more prepared than others. They had those companies that had majority laptops, it was a little easier for them to transition. But if you send an employee home and are okay with them using a personal computer, when's the last time it was updated? Does it have antivirus? Does it have anti-malware? Remember that just because you're allowing your employee access from a personal computer doesn't mean that you're not still liable for the corporate data that may reside on there. The other thing that we talk about, and especially in a work from home manner, restart your computer at least once a week. Most of the time in corporate networks, what we say to do is, you may lock your machine on the weekend, or overnight, but that doesn't allow any of the IT policies or applications to install updates. It's locked. So what do? I restart the machine on Friday, and over the weekend, those updates can be installed. You need to do the same thing for your computers at home and make sure that antivirus is up to date. And the biggest recommendation that we can make now is for you to follow the remote worker policy of your company. For our clients that may not have one, we have templates that we can share of what's out there, but you still have to give, the employee still needs guidance on what they're supposed to be doing with the resources you want them to access. If you want them to only connect to your corporate network via VPN, they need to be able to do that. They shouldn't be able to access it otherwise. If they're supposed to have antivirus or any other tools, they need to have those in place. There are new antivirus out there. The world is changing quickly with malicious attacks that are happening, and technology like autonomous driven antivirus or AI-based antivirus, remediation antivirus in there too. But keep this in mind, every piece of security that you add is going to impact performance. I like to say a joke years ago, I will never in a million years tell somebody that I can 100% secure their computer or network. No IT person should be able to. My best attempt will be to take a laptop and basically glue every port on it shut so that it can't access the internet. But you realize that it effectively becomes a very expensive paperweight. So with security, you always have to keep in mind performance, the ability to keep the machine up and running. This is why more memory is important on machines and so forth. So the making of a domain. Over the years, a bunch of well-meaning people like to help you identify fraudulent email, understand how a domain was created, and what looks suspicious in the first place. So first off, you can go to GoDaddy or any other provider and purchase any domain you want, as long as nobody else has it. That domain name that you see is the root domain. It always precedes the first period and separates the top level domain. Top level domains are .com, .net, .gov, .org, whatever else you see out there. Whatever comes after the root domain and after the top level domain, doesn't matter. Look at 1, 2, and 3 on here. These point to specific areas of a website. So it's only the root domain that you want to pay attention to. And now what the bad guys do is they go out and create a domain that looks almost exactly like your company domain, and it's visually harder to recognize. So can't tell you how many times I've seen Microsoft, right? And instead of an O, it's a 0. And people are looking on their phones and they're looking on, maybe just not really even paying attention. They'll never notice that. So it's very hard to tell without clicking on it and finding out. Is this the one that is correct? Does it have an I or is it an L? It's very, very hard for the naked eye to see. And we don't recommend just clicking to find out. So you see a lot of these abbreviated domains, and especially like on Twitter, correct? Something you see out on Twitter all the time is the abbreviated domain, and it starts with bit.ly, and it's basically truncated so that you don't see the full characters. It's convenient, but you have to hover over the URL or you don't see where it's going to take you to. How many people do that? They just blindly click on it because they trust the social media that it was posted on. So it's a reminder that be sure to avoid those abbreviated domains without verifying the source, right? So if it looks like that and you're saying click to follow, I would not follow that because that would be very likely to be malicious. So web searches, and people talk about this all the time. Note the actual URL in green that you're being sent to. Ignore the blue header. I mean, that's just a subject line. Look at the actual address it's being sent to. And this doesn't matter if you're looking at Google, Bing, Yahoo, so forth. You can have a malicious website full of infections that you want people to click on so that you can infect the computer and gain access to their network. And you can have that blue label say, best solution to clean up temporary files and help speed up the computer. That's just a sales tactic or marketing tactic, basically. So if you're unsure, you can copy and paste that information, and there's multiple places that are secure for this, but one of them is virustotal.com. Norton has their safe web search, and you can verify that the URL that you're wanting to go to is not malicious. And then don't worry about writing this information down. We are sharing this information after the presentation for anybody. You don't have to necessarily take notes on all of this. So some other security suggestions here. What can you do with email? Which one of these do you believe you would be very careful opening? Well, you can obviously tell we've circled Time Warner, important information about recent payment. So what are the signs of that phishing? You got to be very careful and look at those domain names. Is the logo off? Is the actual email address incorrect? Well, most of us don't necessarily know that. Logos misspaced, off color, or missing something. And a lot of times what people, there's still, this surprises me, there still can be a lot of grammatical errors in here, something that doesn't make sense, wrong name, not the right account number. And again, I always say if you get this email and you do have like a Time Warner account, go straight to their website and log in. Don't click the link. I get credit card offers or information from Chase saying, hey, here is your latest rewards points information. Activate this additional reward. I always go straight to the website. I never click through any of the actual emails that I got. Other suggestions, again, the URL hover, make sure and look at it. You can tell by that, that's a very long, link that it's actually being sent to. If you would have opened this on a Mac or PC, you can see that it would actually take you to a completely different area. But again, make sure to look. And what's tough about this is you can't hover on a hyperlink on a mobile device or tablet a lot of times. So if you're seeing this from your iPhone, from your Droid, from your iPad, don't click on anything unless you absolutely are 100% sure it's legitimate. It can wait. That's why we say be the master of your mouse. Don't click on anything. So now that you've learned a lot about domains and emails, how many of you think you're doing a pretty good job so far? Normally, if I'm in a room, about a third to a half of the room would raise their hands. So we didn't do this to this group, but we've done it in the past. This is an actual report of what we call, you have security awareness training, but you also have vulnerability training. So you can send exact images of phishing emails to test your employees and so forth. So this was sent as a security webinar, and part I've taken here. And you'll see here that the people who registered for attendings actually clicked on one of the test phishing emails. Well, it looks pretty legitimate. I mean, Experian, here you go, your free identity protection. I would almost guarantee you 2/3 of America received this email in some form or fashion. Well, what do? The bad actors basically take a copy of that and embed a malicious hyperlink. Well, good actors actually take that same information. Instead of embedding a bad link, they embed a link that employers can track and say, here's an employee that tested on something that was potentially malicious. You need to assign additional training to them. 9% is a pretty high rate of people. It's way better than average, which is usually about 30%. This is where some form of security awareness training, on a routine basis. We suggest monthly, weekly. A lot of the training is 2 to 3 minute, short videos and so forth. I do this for companies all the time, but usually on an annual basis. And once a year is not enough anymore. So again, that's why I'm here trying to get out there, is make sure that people understand what's at stake and how they can help. Another piece of information that's important is encryption. So this is from the New York Times, and it said, what's the one thing that protects a laptop after it's been stolen? Well, if you're in healthcare, HIPAA is the compliance that you have to follow. And HIPAA is an interesting one, especially for IT and for those providers, because if a laptop's stolen, you have to go through and report a breach. Well, the first thing that they're going to ask is if the piece of equipment that was stolen was encrypted. If you say yes, you're done. You no longer have to go through and file breach reports and get penalized and anything else. If you say no, then you've got to go through what patient health information is out there and all sorts of things, and it becomes worse than an IRS audit. And the penalties and fines, especially in the healthcare world, have increased dramatically because the states have been allowed to get that revenue. So don't always want the ability for your IT department to remotely wipe all the machines, but it is still something that we do recommend to at least prevent access to your company email. So the trick to this is a lot of times, we talk about BYOD, which is bring your own device. Does every employee in an organization have a company-owned device? Well, if not, and you're allowing them to use their personal device, you don't have the ability to wipe all the stuff off of their phones, but only their email. Or if you're using Dropbox for business, you need to be able to control the data, not the information on the full device. So be careful and be aware of what you actually have to monitor. So this is not just in the office, but at home as well. Home routers, I think it was at the end of last year, one of the most common, wireless routers in homes had a vulnerability, and they tried to broadcast it as much as possible out there. But a lot of people don't ever go in and say, well, I need to install the latest BIOS of my wireless at home, or it's 10 years old now, I really need to buy a new one. So these devices on homes usually sell for around $100 less. Some of the more expensive ones are $150. But they can remain in use for many, many years. But this is evident of if you're not updating the routers, and as sad as it sounds, people do drive around neighborhoods trying to gain access and do it. Same thing that they will do with checking your mailbox to see if they can whitewash checks. And, you know, I'm not sure everybody still understands the unemployment scams that are happening, especially in Oklahoma. A lot of people received, you know, unemployment claim. I had one on my wife, and I know a lot of business owners that have received them on themselves in their own businesses. And you sit there and go, well, how are they trying to, how do they make any money off all of this? It's very scary what they're doing with all of this in the world today. So I will say devices that use Windows 10 are twice as secure as anything running Windows 7. And if you still have XP, you need to unplug that device off your network as fast as possible. What can you do on Android devices? Make sure you have PIN, make sure you protect it with the updates, have a browser ad blocker. What can you do with iPhones? Same thing, make sure you have Find My Phone. Review your privacy settings. Make sure that anything that's location based is you approve of this. One of the things that really scares me knowing a lot of this, and I have 2 daughters, is there are a lot of texts that go out now about, hey, to pick up your concert tickets, you need to go to Will Call, click this link to schedule a time, and that actually embeds a GPS tracker on their phones. This is how human traffickers are following young girls and kids now. Very scary world. Make sure you back up your phone. Don't download an app if you don't need it. Signs of an infection. Okay, final thing that I'm going to review. I'm a little over on my normal time. What do you do if you click on something you shouldn't have? It's human nature to do so, and I will even admit to make you feel better with this. About 1.5 years ago, I was working on something, was focused on it, was expecting an invoice from a vendor. Lo and behold, in my email, I got it, and I went to click it, and immediately my screen went red. Well, we had website filtering that blocked known bad malicious sites, and it had done so. It said this was a bad site and blocked it from coming out. Now, the bad part on my side is I have a bunch of technicians and engineers that work with us, and every single one of them just got notified that I clicked on something that was malicious. And I'm still one of the most certified people in the company. So it can happen to anybody. But what do you do if you do this? Remember, timing is absolutely critical. Just because you click on something doesn't mean your machine's immediately frozen or compromised. But what you need to do is, my first advice, unplug the computer from the internet. Turn off your Wi-Fi immediately. Second thing is make sure that you let the IT department know as fast as possible. And a lot of people don't think about this. You've got a smartphone, take a picture of what's ever on your screen, because as soon as it goes off, if you can't tell us what it was, we're chasing ghosts a lot of times. So that is extremely helpful to know that this is what this said, or this is a picture of what it is. And those are some of the common signs of a machine starting to slow down, major pop-ups and so forth. But don't just ignore it. That's one of the worst things you could ever do. If you even have a concern, contact the IT department or consultant. If you have a worry about an email, always be preventative and cautious about that. And that's one of the best things that we could ever share. With that, I hope everybody had a good hour of information here. Hopefully you learned something, and keep in mind, we'll be asking about those 3 questions and follow up. With that, we'll actually try to unmute everybody here so that if we can take some questions, and I'll ask Alicia to come back on. We've got 5 minutes, so we want to be very respectful of everybody's time. Hey, Alicia, did we have any questions from any of the attendees today?
I haven't seen any questions pop up. Oh, there we go. There they are. Tim is asking, what about LifeLock Norton 360?
Great question. I currently am testing that out on my machine as a business owner. I've been a LifeLock member for years. It's an insurance policy for a lot of ways. We are currently looking at a Norton extended partnership, but I think uh, they've had a lot of people looking for that right now because Norton bought LifeLock and is now including the 360 licenses. So I will say I am currently using that. What I like about it is it includes a VPN. So I always say never access any Wi-Fi in any public environment, especially if you're not using a VPN. The only two places I really use wireless is at home and office. I control those environments. I recommend people unlimited data plans, just do that. But it's been nice because they have web tracking or security software in there. They have the safe web search capabilities. So I am not fully recommending it, but I'm saying that's a good step in the right direction, yes. Any other questions?
Eric, I had one that was, is there anything that, and you covered some of this, is there anything that businesses need to be doing on the business side of their network to make sure employees can work securely from home while people are working from home?
Always. There's always going to be more to do there. Make sure that probably one of the biggest things I can suggest is the corporate firewall. Make sure it's up to date, has the most recent intrusion prevention and detection software on there. And for small businesses, the part of adding that is it can slow down a machine. So sometimes it's more effective to buy a new firewall with those security measures in place. That also allows for the VPN licensing for home users. And since you brought that up, I'll actually say a lot of people get confused by VPNs. A VPN, what it stands for is virtual private network. And a VPN on your laptop, when you're going to connect, like Norton's VPN, what it does is encrypt the data from point A to point B. So you need that whether you're just browsing the web, but a corporate VPN is encrypting from point A, your home workstation, to point B, the corporate network. So you don't allow any access to the corporate network that is not on that VPN.
Awesome. And then also Brian was asking, what do you think of Scalar, but it's ZS?
Zscaler.
Yes.
That question is probably over the heads of a lot of our attendees today. He's obviously more technical. So Brian, I would be happy to follow up with you after this call, especially since it's right at noon, if that would be okay with you. It is right at noon. If there's no other questions, I would say that we appreciate your time today. We hope you found it valuable. I hope you just learned one thing. Please do let us know, again, the feedback, if there was anything that, what was the most valuable thing you learned today? If there was anything that you felt like we overlooked or if we need to dive deeper into. And then if there's anybody else that would be good for them to have this type of training and security awareness. So with that, thank you all. We hope you have a wonderful end to your week and a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.